Welcome to Investing in Integrity. I'm Ross Overline, CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance, a rapidly growing organization on a mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow. If you're an investor, finance professional, or student aspiring to make an impact with capital, this show is for you. Investing in Integrity brings you conversations with leading minds in finance to help you learn how you can make finance a force for good by investing in integrity. On today's episode, we were joined by Chris Lyons, one of the most dynamic voices at the intersection of culture, technology, and venture capital. Chris is the president of Web3 Media at A16 Crypto and the founder of the Cultural Leadership Fund, a first-of-its-kind initiative that connected iconic Black cultural leaders with the world's most innovative tech startups, while unlocking access, ownership, and opportunity for disadvantaged communities. From launching CLF to helping build a $400 million seed fund at A16, Chris has been a bridge builder across industries, fostering a more inclusive innovation economy. His journey began in the music industry, working under Grammy-winning producer Jermaine Dupri, and evolving into a multi-hyphenate career that includes startup founder, board member, and even wine entrepreneur, which we didn't get into today. Chris is shaping the future of Web3 Media and helping define how culture and capital converge in the next chapter of the internet. Chris has been a friend of mine for almost a decade. I reached out to him shortly after I moved to Silicon Valley to work at Twitter over a decade ago, and started asking Chris for his advice. We met through mutual friends, and I started reaching out to him for just his thoughts on how to build SOF. Back when SOF was a part-time volunteer project, all the way through these last 6 years that I've been building SOF full-time. And his advice has been incredibly helpful in my life. I've always been so struck by how humble Chris is, how service-oriented he is, how kind and thoughtful he is. And frankly, he makes amazing music as well. And I talk about this in the episode. This is a super interesting conversation. You get to hear about Chris's unique journey moving into venture capital by founding his own company, eventually being found by Ben Horowitz and becoming Ben's chief of staff, to now really a leader in that firm and in the industry. We talk a bit about his music. We talk a bit about the Cultural Leadership Fund. We talk a lot about blockchain and crypto and about culture and shaping and evolving culture. And we get to dive into Chris's values, his principles, some of his mental models that have guided him. And we get into his advice for future aspiring investors and seasoned executives. I really enjoyed this conversation. This was a really fun one. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Without further delay, we bring you Chris Lyons. Chris Lyons, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Investing in Integrity podcast. It's been a number of years that we've been going deep on how to build Scholars of Finance, and you've been showing me the way in many ways, and I've been looking forward to this. There's so much to dive into. I want to dive right in. First of all, how are you doing? And can you share with our audience where you're calling in from?
Yeah, I'm doing great and good to see you, Ross, and congrats again on everything. We've probably almost 10 years in the game of knowing each other and just sharing just common interest in terms of really bringing all these different worlds together. And so very excited to be here. I'm calling in from good old South Florida, right outside of Fort Lauderdale. And, it's 95 degrees, hot outside, feeling good, summertime vibes, but just excited to be in some AC and have some good conversation.
I'm excited to get out to South Florida around Basel this fall and hopefully see you out there, man. And hopefully it's still hot out there at that time.
Oh, yeah, come through. It's always hot. You don't have to worry about that.
Chris, let's dive right in, man. You started your career in the music industry, and then you evolved into one of Silicon Valley's most influential cultural connectors. Can you just begin by, from day one, sharing your story with our community?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say that for me, my life always kind of has revolved around this intersection of culture and innovation, really just always trying to see where the future of the world is going to go and figure out, A, how I can be a part of that, and B, how can I add my own touch into where we think this world is going to go. Personally, I'm very excited about all things as a kid, from the first kid to have like a colored flip phone or a ringtone, all the way to a sidekick, all the way to an MP3 player, or, fast forward, just anything that was at the cutting edge. And on top of that, I always had a big passion for music. I taught myself how to play piano and become a music producer and engineer. That was a very amazing time for the music industry. From there, just kind of just always had this idea that, thoughts are things, and originally applied that mentality to all things on the creative side, whether it was music production or engineering, which was amazing because just gave me I started developing a muscle of being able to take things that haven't existed into the world and then to ultimately bring them into life. And, I think music is a very great example of like, an hour before group went to the studio, a song that can, change the entire lives of somebody, emotions or physically or you name it. It wasn't originally even there, right? And so it was always a very interesting thing that just kind of like around creativity and entrepreneurship that has always been in my DNA. And then once the first iPhone came out, and the idea of anybody being able to kind of just make apps and make this idea for like an app or, Uber for this or you name it. And I ended up having a company that made it so that any restaurant, regardless of your technological backgrounds, could have their menus on smartphones and tablets with high quality photos of each individual dish. And that's what kind of really jump started my career, where I ended up moving to Silicon Valley. I was always supposed to be there for 3 months and ended up spending 8.5 years there. And so it's been a fun journey, just kind of always just learning. I'm fortunate enough to work with some of the smartest people in the world right now, focusing on the intersections of AI and crypto and American dynamism and biohealth. And just we have a lot of things in store here at the firm. And I'm just excited just to continue to roll up my sleeves and figure out how I can help make an impact out here.
It's funny, before the interview, you know how Spotify creates like your top songs every year playlist? I remember texting you about this.
Let's go.
Dreams in 2017 and then Waves in 2018 and 2019, literally my number one most played songs. A shameless plug for your music.
The thing is that, in one, I appreciate you because you definitely gave me I needed that $5.80 of streaming fees. Any dollar counts. But, I think the real thing, and I hope it's helpful because that's one of the things I really care about is like just that idea of like the frequency music and being able to, create something that is more science than music, where it's like trying to understand how frequencies can really help elevate people's minds and mentality and really get you into a great space mentally so that you can go out and do your thing. And that's been one of my biggest passions. And it still takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And, I don't get a chance to do it as much anymore, but it's still a big thing that I'm very excited about. And I've personally felt the benefits of it, of just how frequency music can really help impact people's minds and opportunities. And I think it's the secret healer that everybody can listen to. So 432 hertz, 528 hertz, you name it.
Yeah. In my last 10 years, I think you've been in my top 10 songs like 8 of the last 10 years.
I got to make some more music.
A lot of focus music, man. It never gets old. The like 30 to 60-minute tracks, they just permanent timeless. Speaking of your music, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the role that mentorships played in your career trajectory. There have been several really influential leaders who you've received mentorship from. Speaking of music, Jermaine Dupri, and then now in your role in A16, Ben Horowitz, and others. Can you talk about the role that mentorships played in your career trajectory?
Yeah, I think that mentorship is extremely important. It's something that I think that you have to acknowledge when it's in front of you, as opposed to requesting it, because I think the best mentorships are when it's kind of like a silent thing that everyone knows about, as opposed to saying, hey, I mean, look, there's ways when you can say, hey, formally mentor me, formally do this. But, I think that it's an action of service for someone to really take, you under their wings and be thoughtful about your career and your professionalism. And I think that I'm extremely grateful for every single person that has been in my corner and has been supportive of me. For people who are like, how do I get a mentor? When I first started, my mentors were books. I was in Georgia and didn't necessarily know anybody, and being an avid reader and learning, I always recommend people should really, look into biographies and autobiographies as books to check out, because it's a great way to, one, who you already know the end story. So if they wrote a book, they did all right, especially if you pick the right autobiography or biography, but you also get a chance to see their journey and see that, it's not just this one-way street of making it into success, but there's a whole process that's involved around this. And it does take many years and ups and downs and trials and tribulations, and it's not always linear. I mean, as we always talk about that, there's so many different ways in order to make it in a career. But, I think the beauty of books as mentors is that you already know the finish line. My mom always says it's hard to see the picture when you're in the frame. And so oftentimes when we're in a career, it's hard for us to see, okay, when are we going to make it to that other side and when are we going to hit that next chapter? But, if you've read enough biographies and autobiographies and studied the ups and downs of other people's careers, you start to see that you're actually doing exactly the right thing. And it's just part of the journey and part of the process. And I think that even fast forwarding to today, I think that, the world has evolved so much to where mentorship doesn't even have to be, in person and physical. Like, you have mentorship through podcasts now and mentorships through people leading like mental models that you can apply to and things that the amount of information and access to information right now is more accessible than ever. And being able to ask questions from peers online to using AI models to have dialogue and conversation with, I think that the role and the evolution of a mentor continues to expand. But I think, the number one most important thing is just knowing and developing a circle of people that have your back and are in your corner.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you really diving into the importance of getting mentorship in all forms. And I also appreciate the deep gratitude that you have for your mentors. I share that about mine. And, you can't speak highly enough of the advice you've given me over the years. I wanted to ask, on this kind of thread of mentorship, you, when you were sharing your story, talked a little bit about your work at A16. Can you kind of share from when you joined Andreessen to today, just sort of your journey there, the evolution of it, and, feel free to touch on just some of the role that Ben played as well.
Ben technically found me. A lot of people believed in me, but I always will say his belief in seeing me, because I wasn't a traditional hire at all. I wasn't a traditional hire for Silicon Valley, for venture capital, for anything, but I still have all of the DNA that is required to be great, not just in this industry, but within A16Z in general, in terms of our ethos and how we see the world. And it's really shaped the past 10 plus years of my life as getting a chance to have such a strong mental model from working specifically with him, but also the entire firm, how we've grown over these past 10 plus years for me, from my tenure there. And so, starting off as his chief of staff and really kind of having a number of strategic projects that were behind the scenes and super fun to kind of really get my hands dirty and understand what it takes to really be first in class and, do first in class business in a first in class way, which is how we think about everything. And while also exploring new industries and new models and new technologies, continuing to evolve over the years has been eye-opening in terms of from learning about the consumer internet. I mean, for me, I love the application side of things. So like the consumer internet, the era of like, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, Facebook, Airbnb, you name it, to, the evolution of crypto and blockchain technology starting to take off, and, from Coinbase to Dapper Labs to all the way moving forward into companies, NFT spaces like Yuga, to what's happening right now in stable coins. And then you fast forward again to seeing like another technological shift happening in AI. It's all moving so fast. And so you have to just drink from the fire hose. And I just believe that with life moving so just always constantly evolving, the access to the information and being able to process your perspective into the industry has always been super important to me. And it's something that when everybody has the same thought process with us, we always look for that person, that founder who thinks differently and does the thing that is the opposite of what everyone else does. And so training your mind to be okay to kind of have alternative opinions and alternative perspectives that push the conversation as opposed to falling into consensus is something that it's embedded into our firm, and all it does is really help make everybody better than the sum of their parts. So it's been a journey to be here, and I'm excited. You could ask anyone at our firm. We're excited now more than ever with everything that's happening in the space.
Yeah, there's a lot. I love to pull on a couple threads of some of the kind of chapters of your time at A16Z, starting with CLF. The Cultural Leadership Fund was a groundbreaking initiative, both for its mission and its makeup. What inspired the creation of the Cultural Leadership Fund, and what do you see as its most lasting impact on tech and on VC?
I started the fund. We did our first fund in 2018. And for me, it was a combination of a lot of different things. One, I had a personal thesis that the next generation of investors were going to be not just traditional VC, Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road checks, but people outside of Silicon Valley. So the world's greatest athletes, entertainers, musicians, and executives. That's where I had a thesis because, all companies, they might start off in the valley, but if you're going to really scale, you're going to need consumer culture. And the next component is, if you think about consumer culture, like who is one of the biggest leaders and impact drivers of consumer culture, and it's Black culture. And it's something that I've been just deeply ingrained in my entire life. And think about, from art, fashion, film, music, you name it, Black culture has been extremely impactful in terms of really shaping consumer trends. And I think just most recently, just within the early 2010s, did consumer culture really start to move onto the internet. So that was the next wave in terms of where we needed to help kind of build this bridge between Black consumer culture and the future of technology. The second piece is really focused on wealth transfer and understanding that the next generation of wealth is happening within Silicon Valley and technology, and we need to have a seat at that table. And so, making sure that we have more people having access to early stage investments, changing a mentality from endorsements to equity, and really trying to have what I kind of called shared genius, which is like a Serena Williams or a KD or a Nas or Kevin Hart or a Tashonda Duckett or a Shelley Archambault or, an Andre Williams, like you name it. They're all geniuses in their own space, right? And what they do. But what happens when you connect them directly with some of the geniuses that we're investing into and allow them to have not only just an equitable conversation, but also really help drive the future of the business so that you can really scale and learn from people outside of our industry who you're ultimately trying to connect the dots to. So being able to bridge those worlds together and understanding what's interesting for our portfolio companies and understanding where some of our network is very excited to spend their time on, and being able to kind of connect those dots was something that I just got a lot of passion out of and loved, kind of going into what I was saying before around kind of creating things that haven't existed before. And the third thing is really just around talent. They say, 1% of talent that's working in technology is people of color, Black people of color, and you name it. And 0.1%ers are in venture capital. And how do we kind of create more jobs and more opportunities into technology? And so all of our money that we make from our fund goes to a select number of nonprofits that are helping advance more Black people and people of color into technology. And, like I always thought tech was cool, even though it does sometimes get like a bad rep, and, thinks that it might be something that somebody might not be interested in. And we want to make sure more people, they can look into these companies, into these boards, into the investment cap tables and say, hey, people look like me. And, it's not always starting a company and being the next Mark Zuckerberg where you can have a life-changing event. You can work at an early stage startup. You can start as an intern. You can learn coding. You can do all these different things. And now I have an amazing team that's leading CLF and helping identify these next generation nonprofits that are going to really help train and develop our future leaders that are going to be in the industry, and going outside of traditional networks in order to really help make technology and investing accessible and also, fun to do.
It's amazing, man. I remember when you were telling me about it as it was building and then the announcement, seeing all the momentum and traction it got was so inspiring.
It was a lot of work. I don't recommend anybody raising a fund. First time fund that's never even been done before, but we did it. I have a great team there that's leading the way. I'm very excited for them.
That's amazing, man. Well, I'd imagine the crypto fund was a little bit easier to raise, a little bit faster.
That's also a story within itself. I mean, crypto was
Tell us about that. Yeah. Now you're the head of Web3 Media at A16 Crypto, shaping the next frontier of technology and culture in that space. What excites you about the intersection of Web3 and media? And I'm also curious, like, how do you think about what kind of values and like mental models, what should be guiding the evolution of media in the crypto space and the Web3 space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that crypto is the third layer of the internet, and read, write, own, which is, something that my colleague Chris Dixon, coined in terms of Web3 era and what that means. And ownership is something that we talk about so much, not just from a cultural standpoint, but from a technological standpoint. You think about, we don't own our Instagram followers, or YouTube takes, such a large percentage of all the creators' royalties. And same thing with Spotify, with less than 1% of people making over $50,000 or more from their services. So it just makes it very challenging to have a full-time career in an ecosystem that has conglomerates and has, centralized systems that are eating up all of the creators and the next generation of people that really just want to build on the internet. So insert blockchain and crypto, where there's a very strong resources and technology that's being built that's really going to help empower the next generation of financial institutions, creatives, and anybody that just believes that they should, have ownership in what they've created and what they've built. And so as much as it is a technological breakthrough, it's also a right to claim what you actually bring out into this world. And I think that it's such an exciting, crazy, wild, wild west world, but one that I'm constantly continuing to learn and continuing to kind of champion in the verticals that are most interesting to me. I'm a very big believer, and I talk to my team about this all the time around this concept around hiding the wires, where I really do believe that the next generation of blockchain and crypto, everyday users will have no idea that they're interacting with it. And, I think the best example is kind of like GPS technology, like, when you're trying to call a car, or if you're, heading to the pizza shop and you're trying to use your maps or Uber or, Airbnb or Instacart or you name it, you're using GPS, but you're not thinking about that. You're just thinking about it going to get the service done, right? But there's an actual infrastructure that's tapping in and building all the next generation of these companies. And I think that, you're seeing these new blockchains, whether it's Ethereum or Solana or you name it. I mean, we could go on and about these new layers that are basically going to build applications that everyday people are going to be able to start using. And the thing that I always just harp on, and this kind of really brings back to me, like I always have a viewpoint of like what my friends back home would be able to use this, right? Or they'd be able to understand how to interact without needing to use a MetaMask wallet or not needing to save their seed phrase, but still capturing all of the upsides that crypto has to offer. That's kind of where my mind is really trying to help usher, or at least, put my 2 cents out there so that people can, because I think the big issue within the crypto industry, and I'll just speak from my personal self, is that we're so smart, not we, but like the developers, the engineers, the people that are actually the builders.
You're smart too, but I appreciate the humility.
I'm all right. But it's nobody really cares about whether it's an L2 and L1, ZK rollups, all these technical terms. It's like when I was in the music industry, and I used to tell the artists, I'm like, hey, send me a WAV file so I can master your song. And they would always send me an MP3 because, at the end of the day, people just don't care what the file is. They just want to get the thing done. And if it can fit in your inbox, then that's what they're going to send. And most WAV files were over 25 megs, and an MP3 is 3.4. So you're just going to send it because you can send it straight via email. But nobody really cares, right? No one cares about what L1, L2, they just want to get the final result. And for me, I take that same analogy. I never went to an MP3 conference. Like, shout out to all the people that do the NFT conferences. But I think that at the end of the day, we need to really start to put a lot of the technical jargon, quote unquote, in the most respectful way possible and not have that be the selling point and really focus on the benefits. And I think, one example that we're seeing very strong adoption that's happening because of the benefits and not necessarily the actual technological infrastructure is what's going on with stablecoins. And I think that you're seeing mass adoption because people just understand the benefits and why it's a better solution than, traditional systems that are going to eat at your exchange fees and focus on middlemen. So I think the same thing's going to apply to other areas in media and entertainment and other types of ownership that we haven't even seen before. But it's going to take, really great entrepreneurs. It's going to take, technology to continue to advance. And I think that our team and we have the best crypto team in the entire world. Every single person is the smartest people ever. Like, I just love going into the office and just soaking into the energy of my team. And I think, I deeply respect everyone there. And we've done a great job in terms of identifying where the next generation of infrastructure and application companies are going to be built. And I'm very excited about kind of rolling up my sleeves and continuing to add value there.
I'm excited to see the evolution in the decades ahead too, man. Some of the recent legislation that David Sachs, and his team got pushed through over in Capitol Hill, more clarity on regulatory frameworks. Chris Larson, who I'm sure you know, one of our largest donors and one of my dearest mentors that I look up to and appreciate so much. Just like we had him on our podcast twice, earlier in the Gary Gensler, SEC case, more recently, and then just was texting him not too long ago, congratulating him. That whole mess was finally put to bed and they're not being attacked unfairly anymore over at Ripple. From at SOF, a lot of our work focuses on how do you change the culture of the financial system itself, right? And you do that by changing the people. How do you change the people? You go bottoms up. You build a whole generation of future leaders that have the right mental models, the right frameworks. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but I share that to say a lot of the innovation that we're seeing in the financial system is really exciting to me along the lines that you're saying. Like more and more banks, right, adopting Web3 infrastructure, more financial institutions, larger and larger companies growing in the space. It's super, super exciting to see. And I want to sort of use that as a segue to ask you, what advice might you offer people around our development and the evolution of our financial system? As we're hiding the wires, as you've said, as we're hiding the wires and more of our systems are going onto blockchain, what are some of the guardrails you think we need to put up, right, for leaders in this space? How do we make sure we're doing it so it does achieve the positive ends that you've talked about?
Everybody has their own way of investing, and I'm definitely not here to give financial advice. What I will say is I think that the most important thing that I always propose is around the access to information, whether it's understanding how to purchase crypto and what exchanges to use and why, all the way to what's the difference between buying individual stocks versus ETFs versus index funds and how you should construct a portfolio, to really just thinking about something simple, even understanding how to pay yourself first, right? And like, what does that mean? And when it comes to investing in not just into stocks, but into yourself and being able to live below your means. And there's a lot of different things that, personally, when you're thinking about becoming an investor, that, you can apply to your own portfolio and your own way of how you see the world, and testing on a smaller scale that then allows you to verify a thesis and on a track record that over the course of time, you can look back and see how value is compounded, or, what bets you made that you shouldn't have, and allow you to really kind of understand just how the game works. And for me, I think it's very exciting to have people think that, investing is fun and investing is cool, and getting into the stock markets and using various tools that now are extremely consumer friendly And, I think that that same thing is applying on the crypto angle as well too. And who knows where the future is going to go, but I see a world where hopefully US dollar is not the only option, and you'll start to see smaller just economies really starting to be built on chain. And that's something that personally has me extremely excited and gives me hope in the industry.
One quick follow-on question I want to ask, like in sort of the circles that I, run in our donor base, our volunteer base, a lot of senior financial executives at VC firms, private equity firms, asset managers, banks, etc. And when you talk to them about blockchain and crypto, one of the big concerns they have is sort of like the anonymity allowing for, financial crime, right? Money laundering, stuff like that. Crime networks can just anonymously operate on these systems. But then you have people like CoffeeZilla who, with enough research, can like find out who's who and actually, it's all on chain.
Yeah, it's all on paint. It's got to come out.
So I was going to ask, like, if we're sitting here talking, you got a bunch of people that manage billions and trillions of dollars, like, but what about the financial crime risk? What's your response to them?
It still happens in US dollars today. It still happens in with your credit card still. But one thing that blockchain does better than the US dollar or any type of physical currency is the actual traceability and the ability to know that it might move around 1,500 different wallets, but if you're ever going to cash it out, there's some sort of understanding in where that's going to go. I'm more so concerned about security in the aspect of just making sure that your wallet's safe and making sure that you're not doing crazy things like issuing your seed phrase online, because it is the Wild West to some degree in terms of how people are unaware of signing, different signatures on with your Ledger wallet, or knowing what's the difference between what's real and what's not. And so with everything, there is a bit of education and awareness that we have to have in terms of just not being phished. As challenging as it is for the blockchain and in crypto industry, the amount of people that we've seen cybersecurity issues happen over somebody just submitting a simple email. With everything, there's always going to be a challenge, but just stay vigilant, my friends.
I think your point on traceability is an excellent point. Right now, there's 20 something government agencies that can subpoena or access your bank statements and financial activity if we're under investigation, right? The like CFTC can, the FBI can, SEC can, FinCEN, DEA, DOJ. There's a lot of organizations that can get wire history. So stay vigilant and stay ethical, and depending on who's listening.
That is my 2 cents. I approve this message.
Let me shift. I know we only have about 10 minutes left, Chris. I've got a bunch of questions I want to ask on leadership specifically, right? Our organization exists to inspire purpose-driven, principled, high-performing future leaders. What are some of the values and the principles, the mental models and behaviors that you think have contributed to your success? Whether it's integrity, compassion, humility. You've shared some, but what are some of those key values and principles that you think have been the most important guides, in your life?
To be honest with you, I mean, if I could boil it down, I do believe that service is the biggest thing. I always say that I think that venture capital is the ultimate service industry. I started off when I was in the music industry in order to help pay for things. I was working in the restaurant space, and, shout out to Cheesecake Factory. But it taught me so much about just multitasking, service, developing relationships quickly, being able to think on your feet, being thoughtful, and all those components that really just apply to so many different areas in life. And so, I think that you always have to have a mentality of how you can add value to somebody else first. I see a lot of people that are always oftentimes come in just, asking for things without ever sowing any seeds. And as much as, some people just really just about trying to move things forward, people remember that, and people always, not only do they remember how you feel, how you make them feel, but they also remember how you've been helpful. And that's something that's always been a very key thing that I've learned here at the firm. And, we service the entrepreneurs and we service the network, even within CLF. I think that opportunity for us to give back to the nonprofits and the next generation of technologists from, outside of the mainstream industries. What that does is creates an energy that kind of makes the thing full, like unable to fail because it's rooted in something that's bigger than yourself. And I think that's one thing that I personally I got from Ben, where always to do something that's bigger than yourself. And which is amazing advice because it allows you to think beyond what would be good for you. And having that type of karma flow as you go through your professional environment can only lead to good things. And having the courage in order to go out and do those things is the multiplier effect that really takes a lot of personal will to succeed. And so always having the courage and, you know, oftentimes in people's careers, and I've had this happen with me many times. Ben also mentioned this, like don't follow what you love because that doesn't always lead into the right direction. I love basketball, unfortunately, didn't I'm not 5 foot, well, not even 5 feet. You see, that's how I know it, man. I'm not 6 feet, I still can ball on these cats if anybody wants to get some. But following your contribution, right, and how you can actually add value and add service, and all of us have something special inside of us. And it really boils down to, what we can do to really make this world, make our industries a better place, and doing it from a very wholehearted space. And so that's kind of my MO. I'm not from traditional Silicon Valley, but I think that that's always been my superpowers because I love to think and be with the people and really just represent the best way I can.
I think you do it well. There's a lot of wisdom in what you've shared, in my opinion. I want to ask a follow on. What advice would you offer some of our younger listeners about how to stay grounded while they're navigating high growth and high stakes environments? You've always struck me as just super level headed, focused. And a lot of our students, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty. What are one or two quick pieces of advice you'd offer for just staying grounded when things seem high stakes or changing a lot?
I mean, you never want to have them see you sweat, but also knowing that it being scared and afraid and unsure is normal. It's very normal. I mean, every single thing I've done it. Do it afraid, you know, or you have to believe in yourself first. And so it kind of goes back to the courage point. All the real things in the world that have existed come from somebody's mind and somebody's thoughts. And the microphone to the sparkling water brand to headphones that you're listening, that's somebody's idea. And so when you realize that this world is literally just a culmination of other people's ideas, you now are faced with a choice of, are you going to not take that risk and not put yourself out there and live in somebody else's world? Or are you going to bring in the alchemist inside of you and transform lead to gold and really go out and bring your dreams into this world? Because that's what everybody's waiting for, is for everyone to bring their dreams out there. It's just whether or not you have the courage to go out and do it. That's what the journey is all about.
Bro, you keep dropping wisdom like that. You're going to get so annoyed with how often I ask you to come speak to our students.
As long as they're listening, I'm always happy. If it makes sense, then I'm here for it.
We have a couple minutes left. Can I hit you with 3 rapid fire questions? Just hit me with what comes to mind. All right. We've been talking a bit about advice for our younger listeners, for our students. Over half of our audience are seasoned executives and investors managing billions of dollars, millions of dollars. What is one piece of advice or a suggestion you'd offer the seasoned investors listening?
I would say think for yourself. Consensus thinking is a quick way to, put yourself in the middle with everyone else. And I think that having a strong opinion that's very rooted in real calculated information and being sometimes contrarian and sometimes pushing the needle forward, and especially in industries and companies that are okay with not, shaking things up. That's where all the innovation lies. But in order to do that, you have to think for yourself. And I think that the investment stuff will come and you'll write the checks and you'll do the things. But I think that the companies that you invest into are looking at how are you thinking and how are you innovating and how are you adjusting in the times to stay current, to stay relevant, because, we're nothing without the entrepreneur. A VC firm is nothing without its entrepreneur. And so you have to create a vehicle that is in service to your number one customer. To me, I think that founders are very much nowadays looking for who can think for themselves.
Thanks, Chris. Two more quick hits. You've talked about books as mentors. What are one or two top books you'd recommend any aspiring leader read?
What I've been reading lately, I love The Power of Now personally. I think that's always been something really important to kind of connect yourselves with. Chris's book, Read, Write, Own, I put that in there as well too. I still think How to Win Friends and Influence People is a really amazing book. I love Naval's Almanac, the Almanac by Naval Ravikant. I love that. I could go on and on and on. One book I think is really, really, really good, especially for like investors and for your audience, is called The Most Important Thing. And that's by Howard Marks. And I think that it's, when you think about sound long-term investing advice, and I think that book really captures it. And so anybody that's very interested in getting into investing and finance and knowing the value of a dollar, that's a great book. The Most Important Thing.
I will plus one that for sure. We had Howard on the podcast a few months back.
Well, then there you go. Well, tell him to, send me a signed copy.
Yeah, we've had 3 one-on-ones digging into humility and curiosity since then. He's just like such an incredible thinker. He'll be coming back one day, which we're excited about. Last question for you, Chris. You've been so generous in so many areas of your life, and you've been really generous with Scholars of Finance, right? You've been giving me advice almost a decade now as I've been going through my early career building Scholars of Finance for the last 6 years. Here you are coming on the podcast now to share your insights. What's inspired you to support our mission here at SOF, and why would you encourage others to do the same?
Look, I think that you have a service mentality, and I think that you have created a platform that is helping make the world a better place and helping through education and helping through one of the things that is not necessarily taught in every single school or every single household. And so by, creating this service, you are adding value into the world and providing, the access to the information, which traditionally doesn't always get beyond some of the circles that we may or may not be privileged to be in, right? And so I kind of call it like the Robin Hood effect, where you might be in one room and grab the knowledge and then sit back and then share it to somebody else. And I think that you guys do an amazing job of that. And that's kind of my ethos, and anybody that is aligned in that term of thinking, I'm here for it. So congratulations again on all your success. I don't know what you've been listening to that I've said, but I'm glad that it works. I'm just joking, man. You've been doing great. Congratulations.
Thanks, man. I feel like Robin Hood right now, just getting to extract your wisdom and share it with our community right now. So thank you so much for all that you do, all the incredible, impactful work that you've done. Thanks for coming on today. Really enjoyed the conversation. And we'll have to have you back on in the future.
Yeah, no, I'd love to as well, too. Let's get part 2. Maybe, hopefully I'll have a book as good as Howard Marks by next time. And, I could send your group a signed copy.
Yeah, okay. We got a lot to talk about when I'm in Miami, I see. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you so much. And shout out to everybody listening, and really appreciate the time, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Investing in Integrity by Scholars of Finance. I want to share a huge thank you to our advisors, directors, donors, team, and our members who make this all possible. If you like this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any feedback for us, you can send it to hello@scholarsoffinance.org or by visiting our website. Until next time, please join us on our mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow.